Okay, so we welcome Central Basin Water Director Leticia Vasquez Wilson. Leticia, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cortez, for having me, and thank you so much for all of your involvement on water issues and just so many issues, of importance here in our region.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you so much. So we would really like to get more of an understanding of, the water issue. And of course, you are in a great position to be able to inform the community about what has been going on for a long time, as well as what's currently going on the board that you serve on, the Central Basin Water District. So I'm wondering if you could just briefly, discuss the role of this agency and maybe a little bit of its history.
Sure, absolutely. The Central Basin Municipal Water District is an agency that basically provides water to 24 cities in Los Angeles County. And what I did was I actually printed a little map. I hope that you can see there.
Yes. Wonderful. Yes, we can show that. Yeah, so that's a huge area. So it's broadly southeast Los Angeles County. Is that right?
Right, right.
Mhm.
It's and the agency was actually founded in 1952 by a vote of the people, basically to mitigate the overpumping of water in our region. So Central Basin is one of over 5,500 water agencies in the state of California. So our agency is not unique. I will say that we are unique in our region because we are the only agency that sells imported water and also recycled water to water wholesalers. So we actually service, as I mentioned, 24 cities in LA County. And because Central Basin is a water wholesaler, we actually sell the water that we purchase from the Metropolitan Water District to 24 cities and also private water companies and smaller, what are called mutuals.
Got it. Thank you so much for that overview. So it sounds like there is the case that you're a regulatory body over smaller bodies that some of them are private companies, some of them are these mutuals you speak of. Is that a fair description?
Well, what we're there to do is to ensure that they're not over-pumping our local water supply
Hmm.
and provide be an additional source of water. And I'll give you an example. I'm a former member of the Linwood City Council, and during my time as a council member, oh, that's my
Hello.
husband.
Yes.
so so during my time on the Linwood City Council was when I learned about the Central Basin Municipal Water District. The city of Linwood had its own local water supply, and what that means is that the city of Linwood has its own water wells where they pump water from the ground,
Mhm.
and they sell it to the residents of the city. So they have their own water department, their own water wells, they pump the water and then they retail it. They're a retailer, they sell it to the citizens. And the reason why I remember Central Basin so well is because I always wondered why we had residents from our community that would come to council meetings and complain about the cost of water. And there are a number of private water companies that are also retailers. And the water rates that were imposed on the residents by the private water companies that also serviced a portion of the city were up to 4 times higher than the water rates that the city offered. So that really kind of created a lot of questions for me, and I began to learn more about the role of the various water agencies, including Central Basin in the region, and really got me interested in that.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. So is it the case? So you serve a particular district, is that right? A particular district within the water basin?
I do. The geographical boundaries of the Central Basin Municipal Water District, as I mentioned, stretches, over 24 cities in LA County. And so actually the boundaries are divided. We have five directors that are elected by the voters of the district. And each of those directors represents a certain geographical,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
very much like a member of the state assembly, a member of Congress. Actually, our water districts are almost as big as an assembly district. So we have approximately 450,000 constituents in each of our water districts. We have five directors that are elected. And so those 24 cities are divided by five directors that are elected to serve on our board every 4 years. And so I
Got it.
represent Division 4, and Division 4 covers the areas of Southgate, Linwood, Carson, Florence Firestone, Willowbrook, and portions of Walnut Park,
I
and a
see.
small sliver of Cudahy.
And even though you are only elected by a segment of the area covered by the board, you still make decisions that impact the entire region. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Very
Yes.
like a member of the LA
Hmm.
Council or a member of a school board, when they have districts, our votes impact, the entire region.
Yeah, I think this is really important for a lot of people to, to really grapple with, because oftentimes, people think that just because they're not in that district, it means that that person's, that representative's decisions doesn't affect them, right? So, but of course, yes, your votes and as well as the votes of the other members of the board are hugely impactful for the policy around water. So yeah, you've mentioned recently I think people have been seeing on some news sources as well as on social media that there is discussion around. So you mentioned there are five elected board members to the Central Basin. And it is now the case. It was not the case. Correct me if I'm wrong. Before a few years back, that there were not appointed directors. So now we have a category of director on the board who votes on policy, known as the appointed directors. Is that right?
Yes, actually, we have three members of the board that are appointed members of our board of directors. And that came out of a piece of legislation that was introduced by Assembly Member Cristina Garcia,
Who
uh,
covers a lot of the area?
right? Who, yeah, she covers a portion of the area. And it's actually it's Assembly Bill 1794, and there was a subsequent bill that was passed that created additional changes, and it's AB 591. And so, since the passage of that bill, the composition of our board has changed. So we now have three individuals that are appointed to our board by the retailers that the Central Basin Municipal Water District sells water to. We currently have two members of the appointed board who are from private water companies. And that represents a number of issues for our board. And those issues basically have to do with their conflict of these water companies. They're created specifically uh, to generate a profit, by the sale of water um, to the areas that they service.
Got it. Okay, wait. So let me just make sure I have this straight. So you're saying that I know I don't know if there's other bodies that where this happens, governmental bodies. So there are the elected people who are voted on by the public at large, by the electorate, and then there is a special category of appointed directors that are voted on by a smaller set of organizations, the water purveyors. So is that I want to make this clear to the viewers. So is that right? And are there other that bodies like this where this has happened?
There's no other body in the state of California or the nation, public water agency that has private water companies that are for profit, that are profit driven, that serve on their boards. And that has become very problematic for our agency, and has really created a conflict for the members that have served or that serve the from the private water companies that serve on our board. And one of the big issues is they're not accountable to anyone.
Hmm.
These appointed board members are not accountable to anyone. uh, the elected directors, we're accountable to the voters that elect us. If we make decisions that are not in the interest of our constituents, the voters, every 4 years, the voters have an opportunity to decide whether or not they want to put us on our reelect us. These appointed water purveyors that come from these private water companies, there's no accountability. They don't have a residency requirement. All of the private water companies, the individuals who serve on our board from the private water companies live outside of LA County. They live outside of the district,
Wow, not outside of LA County.
outside of LA County. They all live outside of LA County. So how and why would we think that they're going to represent the interest of our constituents when they're not invested in our community?
Got it. So there are individuals that um, some of the entities, such as the private water companies, voted for to serve on the board?
They submit a ballot to our general manager with the name of their nominee, and that ballot is basically reviewed by the general manager, and then the general manager basically sees through the appointment process. So there's no vote by the people. There's no oversight. There's no public oversight, which
Wow. Mhm.
again is very troubling.
Yeah, so it's almost like you have corporations sitting in the government. Would that be fair, or is that too extreme?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not like almost, it is. I
Okay.
have these private water companies that are basically trying to take over our water systems. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. The Sativa Water District, which is located actually in my part of this area for the Central Basin Service area, had a number of water quality issues that made
Hmm.
national
Yes.
headlines right after the Flint, Michigan issue, national headlines for over the course of a year. And that the Sativa Water District was a smaller public agency, public water agency, like Central Basin, but a lot smaller, who had assets, who owned water rights, who owned buildings and land, who owned water wells, which are very, very, very valuable, very valuable. In fact, the city of Downey and the cities of Southgate are some of uh, are probably the cities, in addition to the city of LA, the city of Long Beach, the city of LA, the city of Downey, and also the city of Southgate, are the cities that hold the most water rights in the Central Basin Service area. And those communities have spent millions of dollars to own those water rights. And those water rights have been purchased uh, with the monies that those water departments have generated. It's all public money. So, getting back to the Sativa Water District, the Sativa Water District was dissolved by the County of Los Angeles, and right now is in the process of being given to a private water company.
So the county board of supervisors voted for that or allowed that to happen?
The LA County Board of Supervisors conducted an RFP. So they, kind of put it out to bid, and various, actually four private water companies and one public water agency, which was Central Basin, submitted a bid to basically take over the entity. And the county um, the awarded it to a private water company to hold. And so that's a part of the trend that I have talked about, the trend of privatizing our public water systems, which
And this has been done under the current membership of the LA Board of Supervisors, of course.
right, right, right.
Mhm. So
So
they could have potentially done that with maybe they could have converted it to some sort of public or reiterate the role of public ownership. Instead, they chose the private ownership.
right, right.
Yeah, that's quite disturbing to say the least.
Right. So
So
they get all of the assets, they get all of their buildings, they get all of their water rights, they get all of their water wells, and it's just given to them. And all of these assets, again, were acquired with public money.
right. So
You know,
it feels a little bit similar to, I think, something that maybe has gotten more media attention at the national level. How companies like Nestle are going up to the Great Lakes and draining that water, and they're paying very very little for it. So it seems that that is what is going on here in South East Los Angeles. Is that would that be a fair assessment?
right, right, right.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Mhm.
So there's a privatization effort. So a lot of people, thousands of people actually saw a few weeks back that you were detained by the sheriff. And that seemed to be in the context of a lot of controversy between the elected board members and those that are not elected, the appointed board members. So I'm wondering if you could speak as to what maybe led up to that and the circumstances around that.
Well, there's been a transition of power, so to say, on our board, and the elected officials have decided that we will not permit our public water agency to be privatized. And so we had a reorganization. Actually, we were scheduled to do it in December, and unfortunately, the the corporate people on our public board basically prevented us from reorganizing in December because they knew that they were going to lose their control of the board, and broke quorum, left the meeting, broke quorum again in January at one of the meetings, and we were finally able to reorganize on January the 30th. And at that meeting, I was actually assaulted by the chairman because he was upset that he, along with his corporate pals, were no longer going to control the board. And so my colleagues, my elected colleagues, and I, just started asking for financial documents about how the agency has been spending its money. And the finance director, who was appointed by the corporate folks on the board, was refusing to give us documents about how the public's money was being spent. And so we began asking questions, sending emails, public records requests. Mind you, we're elected members of the board. We have a right to have access to where every single penny is goes that is spent by the agency. He refused to do it, and he attempted to basically lock us out of the building. And my colleagues and I walked in and we said, we want these financial documents. He was very upset and wanted us kicked out of the building. And so he called law enforcement, and Who knows what we're still actually in the process of finding out what they told law enforcement, but they came out on a service call and without question put me in handcuffs and was talking to the same finance director that refused to give me documents and probably 45 minutes later released me without a response about why I was being handcuffed. So it was, the effort of the private folks to just take over our agency, shut it down.
To put an
Yeah,
elected official in the back of a sheriff's car.
right.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, many people were seeing that as it was happening, and I think the overwhelming question is how could this possibly have happened with an elected official? So it seemed to be an instance of just extreme corporate power having control over the agency. And so, what has happened since then? Where are we now? What do you see from the inside? What is going on with the appointed directors? Are they siding with the elected directors generally a little bit more, given all that outcry that we saw in the media and social media, or are things staying the same?
Absolutely not. I mean, we haven't been able to have a board meeting and conduct business because they continue to end our meetings abruptly and break quorum. And so, we're very concerned. There's actually a lawsuit right now pending, and we have a court hearing on July the 23rd because the private water companies are basically refusing to take direction from the majority of the board. So they hate democracy. We have a 7-member board. Right now we have a 7-member board. Our board is actually composed of 8 members. Okay. They're one of the private water companies representatives resigned in November of last year. So December was the first meeting that we had where we had only 7 members of the board. And the private water companies are saying you can't do anything. You can't move an item on the agenda without 5 affirmative votes. Um, and that's the case based on an 8-member board of directors, but it's not the case on a 7-member board of directors. So what's happened is that we're basically um, we're at a standstill because the private water companies are refusing to allow the 4-member board majority, which are the elected directors, to move forward with the agency's business.
So does that mean that, say, maybe there's been an attempt to pass this and that resolution or some guidance to these to all the purveyors that are being regulated that are involved here, and they have refused to comply with what the board is determining? That is, with what the majority of the elected board members uh, are putting forth as policy.
Right, right. For example, we hired an interim general manager actually on February the 24th. His contract was approved by 4 members of the board. We have again 7 members authority. Our administrative code says um, that that basically four affirmative votes are okay to move forward the agenda. And what the private water companies are saying is we're not going to accept the general manager or the interim general manager that you've appointed because you don't have 5 votes. So they gave specific instruction to Mr. Andrew Hamilton to not carry out the directives of the board majority because they didn't, because there wasn't 5 affirmative votes to do so. So he's basically refused to accept the interim general manager as um, the leader of the agency.
I see. So, what body do you think would adjudicate this? Like, is this an issue for the district attorney or higher than them? Like, how in a world where there's cooperation, which may not be this situation, how would the board move forward to decide how things are going to function again?
Yeah, well, these private water companies again are just have just basically hijacked our agency and they're operating illegally. They should be abiding by the law, and the law says that four is a majority, and we should be able to move forward. Unfortunately, that's not happening. This matter will be heard in LA County Superior Court on July the 23rd. Another alternative might be, and we've reached out through our attorney to the Attorney General's office to give us an opinion on the matter. There's tons of case law that supports our position. And our position is that in the absence of a resignation of a member of the board, what's considered a board are the individuals that are sitting. So in this case, we have 7 sitting members of the board. And so that's the majority of 7 is what constitutes a majority to move forward an agency. And in this case, it's 4. And so we have plenty of case law, and we are going to present that in court for a judge to rule.
Got it. So let's go back a bit to, you mentioned Sativa, the water district, and what the ultimate outcome there was with the County Board of Supervisors. So we noticed that one of the County Board of Supervisors, I think it was Janice Hahn, she actually chimed in on the issue, and I think it's important for viewers to understand if when she chimed in that led to any changes so that the elected board members were becoming more respected in general by the staff, or did it have any effect?
Um, Actually, I've known Janice for many years, since my time as a council member, and actually her time as a member of the LA City Council. So we did reach out to her to see if she could, kind of mediate um, the um, the division on the board, and she agreed to come in and sit in on a meeting where we had a discussion about our insurance policy. Every year, like many public agencies in the state of California, we have to purchase insurance, and unfortunately, the private water companies refused to vote on securing an insurance policy for the agency. And obviously, we're very troubled by that, because if you're not insured and a fire happens, then you basically lose your assets. So we requested that she come in and mediate. She came in, and I believe it did have some impact, because we were able to get the private water companies um, to um, to cooperate um, um, to cooperate in the meeting. And when I say that, I mean they didn't get up and walk out and kill the quorum. We actually were able to get approval by the board to purchase our insurance. However, what I found especially troubling was that the finance director, basically, after there was a 6-1 vote, 6 affirmative votes and 1 no vote. The no vote came out of Downey. The assistant city manager, who also serves on our board, voted no. But there were 6 affirmative votes, and our finance director basically told Janice Hahn, Supervisor Janice Hahn, that he was not going to pay the insurance. And
That as a staff member, he was going to refuse to do the transaction?
to the transaction. Yeah, putting the agency at risk. I mean, like, what staff member does that? What staff member intentionally refuses to pay a bill that's required, to be paid to protect an agency? And and as I mentioned previously, the reasoning behind his unwillingness to move the agency forward is that we needed 5 affirmative votes. Well, in that case, we had 6 affirmative votes to purchase insurance, and he refused to do it. So We just need to get these private water companies off of our board, them and their cronies. We need to be able to maintain, keep our water agencies in the hands of the public and make sure that there's accountability across the line.
Got it. So on that topic, I mean, you mentioned, of course, that this unprecedented situation of having these appointed directors who are voted upon by private water companies is an unprecedented situation. So you mentioned that I was introduced through a bill. So is there, as far as you know, any action on the say on the part of the state senate or the state assembly to roll back that bill, or is it the case that the those representatives are sticking with it and they really want to have these appointed directors there for for whatever reason they might explain to themselves, which of course could be self-serving. But is there any attempt to go back on this bill?
Well, I understand that there are efforts on the side of Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia just recently to basically fast track a bill that would put the Central Basin Water District in receivership. For what reason, I don't know. I can just tell you what I've been told. And I have reached out to Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia for over the past 3 years. I have reached out to her through email and phone calls. She has refused to meet with the elected officials and the residents of her community, of her district, which is a part of the Central Basin District, to talk about these issues. And I don't understand how and why a member of the legislature can introduce legislation that impacts an entity, and then that same member refuses to meet with the elected officials that represent that entity. I
Yeah,
mean, that makes absolutely no sense. So
yeah.
what I did, let me tell you what I did, is I was like, you got to follow the money trail, right? So I look at her financial records, and she's getting tens of thousands of dollars from the private water companies in donations. Tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And, that's very troubling. How and
Yeah, especially she brands herself as a environmentalist. Um, so yikes. Okay, so just so that the viewers are clear, so this new bill for receivership. So would that mean that it would be even faster for the county or state to take it over?
we don't know. There hasn't been anything that has been submitted to Leg Council. They're the ones that basically the attorneys, the legal arm of the legislature. They basically work with the members to craft the bill, and they haven't actually crafted the bill. But there have been discussions, and various members of the legislature from the Central Basin Service Area have been approached with basically misinformation, and the information that's being given to other members of the legislature to try and get authors for the bill is that Central Basin doesn't have a general manager, that Central Basin does not have a general counsel, that Central Basin doesn't have a board president, that Central Basin doesn't have insurance, and that Central Basin is financially unstable. And so I have developed a packet with all the evidence that basically supports the facts. And the facts are that Central Basin has a general manager that was voted on by the board. Central Basin has a general counsel that was voted on by the board. Central Basin has insurance, and Central Basin has paid that insurance policy. Central Basin is financially solvent. And I went ahead and submitted that to members of the legislature who are being given wrong information about what's happening at Central Basin.
Got it. Okay, so let me try to. So, as a constituent of Central Basin, I want to try to see, and you correct me if you think I'm totally off. So, is it the case that Assembly Member Cristina Garcia is allowing private water companies to really influence her direction, which is the direction that would boost their profits? Because of, right, if say if the Central Basin Municipal Water District is disbanded, given to a private agency, so or private organization, or just dismantled entirely, it would be the case that it would be, say, easier to raise the prices on water and potentially cut corners, such that maybe even the water becomes less healthy. So, would that be a somewhat fair assessment of what might be happening here?
Absolutely. I mean, there's less oversight, there's less oversight, and there's just less accountability and less transparency. As I mentioned during my time on the Linwood City Council, residents that were serviced by the private water companies constantly attended our council meetings complaining that their water rates were four times higher than what the city was offering. And at that time, I started again investigating, well, what's happening here? Well, the water rates that the private water companies impose on their customers are usually three times higher, and there's less accountability. In order for the residents to be heard, they have to fly up to San Francisco for a hearing before the Public Utilities Commission. And let's be real, who can afford to fly to San Francisco for a hearing of the Public Utilities Commission where they have to pay their airfare and they have to pay, a hotel to sleep in? I mean, it just,
Yeah, I mean, it's like the disempowering of the community, right? Constantly, and this is another way.
yeah, there's no opportunity, there's no very little oversight, very little public accountability, and very little opportunity for the residents of our communities to have a voice in this process.
Wow.
And
So
that's what privatization does.
in the midst of this pandemic, I mean, of course, it's been going on a while longer, but it sounds like Assemblymember Cristina Garcia and perhaps others are guilty of trying to dismantle a key governmental body that helps us make sure that we have a stable supply of water and that water is affordable. Is that, like, again, that's right?
Affordable and accessible, because remember, the 40 retailers that we sell water to in the Central Basin service area, which are, within the 24 cities that we service, most of them have their own water wells, so they have their own local water supplies. They pump the water and they sell it to the residents. But again, their pumping is limited. So for example, if the city of Downey can lawfully pump 100 gallons, and these are not real numbers, I'm just giving you a scenario that's easily understood. If they're legally allowed to pump 100 gallons of water from their water wells a month, but the residents use 150 gallons, then the city of Downey can only pump, according to the law, 100 gallons. But the 50 gallons, they still need it, so they have to get it from another source. And so that additional source of water is provided by Central Basin. And so the city of Downey has to buy those 50 gallons from um, the um, the Central Basin in order to prevent the overpumping of the local water supplies. And again, Central Basin was created specifically to protect our environment, to be a steward, of our water supply, and to prevent overpumping of our local water wells.
Right. So because
That's
over pumping would be problematic
our
for,
environment, yes.
yes, of course.
Creating subsidence, something called subsidence, which is when the earth begins to cave in.
Right. Exactly. It's like happens with fracking, right? So
Right.
wow. Okay. So there are very wealthy interests that want to get even wealthier by jacking up the price of water potentially. But how do they get there? They get there through disbanding public agencies that prevent them from doing such actions. So wow. So what would you we're gonna have to wrap up, but what would you suggest? I mean, we'd love to have you on and for to keep us updated. Would that be okay?
absolutely.
Yes, but what would you suggest right now for the public to do? Because I think clearly the public would not want water to be further privatized in Southeast Los Angeles.
Mhm. Well, we're certainly asking you to attend our board meetings. Our board meetings are held the fourth Mondays of the month because of the COVID-19 issue. We have our meetings available through Zoom, and they start at 10 a.m. So we certainly encourage you to attend our board meetings, learn more about our agency and what we're responsible for doing. I would also ask that you contact your member of the legislature and express your opposition to the privatization of our water system. And then the third is I would invite you to attend our water education tours. And they're available at www.centralbasin.org. And these water education tours basically take us out to the Colorado River, the State Water Project, and also Diamond Valley Lake, which is where Central Basin gets its imported water that we bring into our communities. And we also have another trip that takes us to the LA County Sanitation District. And the LA County Sanitation District is where Central Basin gets its recycled water. And so, for those of you that are familiar with recycled water, if any of you drive through our communities and see a purple pipe, that means that recycled water is going through those pipes, and we typically use it for landscaping and irrigation of our public parks and cemeteries and public facilities. So we have educational tours that we take our residents on to learn more about them.
Got it. Wow. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm sure that we want the public to be very engaged because this could really be very harmful to us. So we have to be very careful here. So
Absolutely, water is life.
water is life, and yeah,
Water is life. We
right.
can't manufacture it, can't make it.
Exactly, exactly. Well, yeah, and I'm sure that when people hear more about this, they'll even start protesting and all those things. So I hope that the public make sure you keep aware, and everyone in the public, please be mindful of everything that's going on. So, well, thank you so much, Director Vasquez Wilson. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Dr. Cortez. Thank you for your involvement and your activism. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so
Your
much.
consciousness.
Yeah, we have to keep going. Water is life. Water is the right. So, okay. Well, thank you again so much.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.